Hey guys, thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for people to log in during the lunch. Guys, let's get started. Happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is all around how to build a brand partnership. I'm very glad and very honored to have my co-host for the session, Mr. Dave Wallace. He works with us as an advisor and mentor here at TPP. We spent the last couple of months both going back and forth, creating new platforms that you entrepreneurs in our ecosystem can kind of enjoy. I hope you guys are excited to hear the first pep talk coming out that Dave's been recording for you in the last couple of weeks. And I hope you guys have been enjoying the sessions I've been hosting. In today's topic, both Dave and I are going to be breaking down how to build brand partnerships. Rather than just boring you with the knowledge that we have, we've invited Steve Dool to come on and talk about his journey, break down some of the stuff he does currently in his job, and then just have a general conversation. Throughout this session, please feel free to jump in the comments and ask any questions you have, maybe put some questions or analogies out there you want us to discuss. We put it out on our newsletter last week and we've got a few questions already loaded that we can kickstart everything off, but please utilize this session as a time for us all to communicate. Probably just my way of just getting the energy going with everyone. Question for both of you, both Dave and Steve. Could you both tell me about the first time you ever did a brand deal and what did you learn from that experience?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to start. I had worked a little bit in marketing jobs before I came to Depop, and I'd done some sort of very low level sponsorship deals with trade shows and things like that. So discounting those, I think the first kind of big partnership that I worked on at Depop as part of the brand partnerships team was with a designer called Richard Quinn, who's a designer based here in London. And it was sort of bridging some of my past experience in fashion with what Depop was doing at the time, which was really, and still is doing, which is really focusing on circularity in fashion. And so we used a lot of excess fabric from Richard's studio to make pieces that were accessible to our community at a price point that was significantly lower than what he normally does. But I think what the biggest sort of learning curve there was just about how two extremely different ways of working based on us, you know, at Depop, we're a peer-to-peer platform versus someone who's a very high-end designer who uses a lot of like private clients and has, you know, upscale boutiques and things like that, and really devoting enough time to that portion of it. So aside from the strategy and the, you know, marketing plan and all of the content we're creating and even the product itself, just dedicating time to figuring out the ways that two very different companies work together in terms of approvals or like meeting cadence, excuse me. Really getting in there so that stuff was kind of out of the way so that we could focus on what we're actually creating is something we've accounted for and done so much more, and just makes the whole process a lot more collaborative, and then ultimately makes the end product and the end result a lot better as well.
Nice. Dave, your first
so yeah, I mean, as you can tell, I'm not from the world of high fashion myself. So
what do you mean? I can't.
I thought I should make an effort, Steve. So no, so my background is much more service orientated, and I guess the kind of, I think when you're in an agency or a service business, what you kind of recognize very quickly is you can't do everything. So augmenting what you can do with other skills is kind of critical, and knowing who to turn to and how to work with those people. So I mean, Steve, as you say, I think it's looking at the sort of operational things like, the cadence and meetings and all the other bits and pieces is kind of critical. But for me, it's about the fundamentals of where do we have gaps and how do we fill those gaps. So the earliest one I can remember was a technology firm based out of Germany for an online banking project that we were working on, and we didn't have the ability to do security. So we found this company, which was, I think at that time, the only company outside of the US which was able to do the level of security that we needed. So, it was an immediate fit for what we needed. But, that was kind of the first of many, many, many sort of partnerships that I've had over the years.
Love it. Two different experiences, two different worlds, but you're both super connected in the fact that you provided value and got things done, which is super, super cool. The question I love asking next is something that's an age-old question. Before it used to be called, what would you tell a 17-year-old self? But I suppose on this journey of, doing deals, partnering brands, upholding the value of the brand you're representing, something that I feel is very important when kind of navigating and building your brand story is actually understanding where you come from and understanding where we're going. So a question I had for both of you was, what do you wish you knew when you started, really?
I mean, I think I and this has become more true as I've gone on in my career. I think I wish I knew in the beginning the value of my own instincts and my own kind of gut feeling. I think oftentimes, especially when you're starting out or when you're in a field that maybe you don't have a lot of experience in, I felt oftentimes, I should just speak for myself, felt a little bit like I was holding back and kind of, deferring to people who were more experienced in that specific realm or that specific line of work. Sometimes it was a case of, I wasn't as comfortable dealing with data. Depop is a very data-driven company, for example, or, there were people who had more practical experience running ad campaigns at huge agencies, which I don't have. But ultimately, in terms of the operational side of things, but even just from a brand value perspective and brand alignment and everything, the intrinsic kind of instincts that I have served me well. And that's kind of the sort of thing that you can't really teach. And it certainly is sharpened with experience, but there's something that I think was there that I wasn't always relying on as heavily as I could have, and as I would have been sort of within my right and my remit to do. So I think just as part of it is self-confidence, part of it is just, hindsight is 2020, where you have to kind of go through some things where maybe I didn't speak up or I didn't exactly fight for certain things as hard as I would have. But I think knowing the value of your point of view is really important. I wish I had known that a little bit more, specifically when I was younger.
Okay. And Dave, yourself?
I couldn't agree with Steve more. I think, actually understanding sort of that you have a valid point of view, and have instincts for a valid point of view is really, really important. And I think particularly when you're looking at partnerships, it's really critical that you do follow your instincts around what you feel about the chemistry of the kind of the partner, and it's that sort of intangible feeling in your stomach around that word chemistry, as I say. So sometimes you will just have a bad feeling about something, and I think learning, I would sort of say to myself, exactly like Steve, just listen to what your instincts are telling you, because, when I look back over the course of my career, it's where I haven't listened to myself and my brain's overrided my heart. That tends to be where things haven't worked out so well. I think the other thing is just being, very honest as well. So, don't try and, bend, I guess, the view of you around what you think people should be considering or thinking about you is just be yourself. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I couldn't agree with Steve anymore.
And I think too, like if you hopefully you're surrounding yourself with partners or with people on your own team who share that point of view, which is a whole other topic around selecting and kind of guiding who you work with. But I think oftentimes that honesty, or if you're feeling any doubt about your own instincts, being honest about that, people around you should be able to empower you to then have a little to back you up, basically, to sort of co-sign on what you're saying, and to maybe even show you, for example, this is how you can translate that into a language that these partners or that your colleagues will understand.
Can I, because I'm really interested in that, because, often with brands and partnerships, it's not just about you, it is about your kind of team. So how have you sort of managed, I mean, and I guess this is for you as well, Bejay, but how have you managed to kind of take the team with you in terms of saying, well, this is a great partnership to have? I mean, have you got sort of frameworks that you use, or what's the way it kind of works for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of that work is done before you even get to a concepting stage for a successful partnership. So especially as I'll just use Depop as an example, as our profile as a company has risen, we've gotten a lot more inbound requests than we had 2 or 3 years ago for brands and for people who want to work with us. And so a lot of that is sometimes just sifting through. We know this company will resonate with our community for X number of reasons. And we do have a rough list of criteria that are just sort of baseline things that we need to see. Things that are important values to Depop, like sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can kind of weed out some people there. But ultimately we do that. I do that work up front. I say I because up until a few months ago, it was just me handling brand partnerships. Now I have a colleague, Sade, who works with me. But I would go through and just kind of have these conversations and really try to hone in on, like, what are the shared values of our company as a starting point? And oftentimes at that level, you can kind of read into, and then the more you have more conversations with the rep on the brand partnership side or the brand partner side, you can kind of read into, this is how they work. This is what they want to see. Because I think sometimes people come in with, hey, we want to reach out to Gen Z, or we want to be relevant to Gen Z, so we're going to partner with Depop. But there's a million brands you could partner with that are speaking to Gen Z. And so why us specifically? And I think the most astute brands or people who work at brands who are the most astute know that and come into it with, like, this is what's important to us. We think this might be important to you. Do you agree? What is important to you? And have those kind of conversations. Not everyone does. So you've got to get that kind of, I think, hammered out in the beginning, even before you get into, like, what is the specific objective of this project from, like, a business bottom line point of view. Just like, what are our shared values? And through those conversations, I also think ways of working kind of become a bit more clear as well, just the more you talk to someone. So we do a lot up front before I even bring in the rest of the brand team, the creative team, anyone else really, legal team.
But I mean, I guess one of the things that, listening to that is obvious that you have a kind of really good understanding of what the brand stands for, and that the sort of purpose sort of sits at the heart of, partnerships. And I think that's entirely the right thing. So you've kind of got a value set, and if companies don't meet that value set straight away, that, I guess, would act as a great filter. So I think it's really important, that point of the kind of the essence of the brand and the purpose for people to kind of understand. That becomes your yardstick, I guess, around a lot of these things.
Yeah, and there are certain practical things that kind of come in the way, even for brands that we would love to work with. So, budget, timing, things like that are kind of, you can't really control to a degree. But it's, if we weren't very specific, and there's a lot more people than just me who are working on our brand mission and our brand values and all of that. It's a whole team and really company-wide who kind of feed into that and refine it. But if we didn't have that, I think there would be a lot of opportunities for brand partnerships that probably we could get a lot of press out of, probably have huge numbers of social impressions, but it kind of would add up to nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like, there would be no long tail effect of it. And then what happens then is it's just like diminishing returns. If you're just doing partnerships for the sake of doing partnerships, or for like little gains here and there, I think there's a certain, I think the consumers really savvy at this point, and they kind of can see when is something just very cynical and when is it actually built around something, even if it's just a tiny thing, just something real that shows more about both of the brands and what they stand for.
I don't know if you'd both agree, but for me, when running my different teams, something that I've had to learn over the years has been actually not being afraid to say no and not being afraid to go, actually, this doesn't really sit right. You know, so that short-term gain for that partnership income, understanding that, as you just mentioned, Steve, the audience are savvy. The audience are people, we're people ourselves. And if you already in your gut don't feel right in the deal, it will come through in the work. And I find a lot of entrepreneurs, especially those who are just starting out, we're so happy to lap up and get anything that's coming our way to try and make this dream a reality. But there is something to be said about that long-term vision actually informing the daily decisions. So an exercise I've always done with my team is yearly, and get to do it again this year. We did it at the start of the year, but I've got some new teams now. But yearly, I like to do something between all of our kind of networks, which is, right, if everyone can list down like their favorite brands on a sheet, and then have another sheet where they write down how those brands make them feel, and then store that as an exercise. So, you know, you can do it in a team of two, you can do it by yourself, but that's exercise that we start off with, which just gives your brain a thinking as to, why do I love a certain trainer brand, a certain hoodie brand, or a certain XYZ brand? And then when you go back and do the work on yourself, you then do an exercise where you have your brand name in the middle, and then around it, you're writing around it, how do you want to make people feel? What characteristics do you feel about your brand at the moment? And then you list it out. And then the third task is to ask a few customers or a few friends who've interacted with brands to describe your brand without telling them what you wrote. And I find that process quite interesting, because then you go, right, if this is a yardstick and I've got these feelings about the brand I'm building and what we've done this last year, or what we're doing currently, what are people actually telling me? And then that becomes a really interesting exercise for you to go, actually, are we aligned? Are we not aligned? And when you go and talk to brands and you're looking to do a partnership, whether it be for an event series or a product drop, having that at the start of the conversation, I've always felt does make you different. So for the Purposeful project, we're like, we help entrepreneurs for free. We will not charge you. That's our thing. We're going to help 10 million people, entrepreneurs support entrepreneurs. Our values are very clear. And it helps, you know, do interesting things. So for anyone listening, you know, trying to come up with little exercises with yourself that don't cost lots of money, but just cost a bit of time, I think could really help the positioning. Does that story ring a bell with anything that both of you guys do in your teams? Is there processes you guys go through just to check or read the room with like where you guys are at culturally?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar. We sort of now with my colleague who I work with on brand partnerships, she and I have kind of, we have a bit of a shorthand now because we've done that before. So we can kind of say, but again, it's just the two of us. And oftentimes when we have to, as a larger brand function, so not just brand partnerships, when we have to sort of articulate our point of view to the rest of the business and get their feedback in it, that kind of thing is really helpful. And sometimes I think you do have to lead with emotion in a lot of this kind of branding exercises, which is not always the easiest thing to translate to someone who is sort of working from a different point of view, whether it's, you know, someone who's an engineer where there's a very specific, you know, framework for how they work, or someone who is more data driven in that way. So it's we work very hard to kind of translate that into a kind of language, depending on which part of the business we're talking to just because I think it's in everyone's best interest to speak the language of who they're speaking to, but you'd never be able to get to that point without doing an exercise like the one you just described, where you have to kind of really sometimes just take pen to paper and just literally write it down.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the old style way of doing things like pen to paper. I think is often a great, you know, getting a whiteboard out and writing on it is often a great thing. So, you know, for me, like I really think sort of defining your purpose and what you're trying to do from an early stage and the kind of values which sit at the heart of that, I think is just a critical thing. And I think that is for me, the essence of what a kind of brand is all about. I think then having honest conversations with your team about, you know, are there brands that we would just not like to partner with, or not like to work with. I think it's kind of critical to have the list of those areas which people are really uncomfortable with. So when, like you say, Bejay, there will be moments when you're a small startup where someone will wave something in front of you and it could be game changing for you, but it may not sit with your values, and you'll have a decision to make. And I think being prepared for that is really, really critical, to be honest with you. So, because it's one of those things, when that time comes, there's no kind of right or wrong answer, but if you go against what you believe, I think that can kind of have a detriment to you kind of going down the line. And I think particularly when you think about partnerships, if you end up in a partnership with the wrong company, it can have profoundly damaging implications on you and your business. So I think just sort of getting this, like, I love your idea of just sort of sheets of paper, just getting this done early on is super critical. And then for a company the size of Depop, it becomes business critical, I guess, in terms of you can't afford really to get this stuff wrong, can you?
And I think the other thing is, I mean, it might be different if you're sort of really an entrepreneur at the beginning stages where it's just you and you kind of are living the values of your company. But when you're part of a bigger machine or a bigger brand, I think it's sometimes also hard to sort of be really, really mindful of how much is this a company that I want to work with, as opposed to that is the best company for, or best partner for my company that I'm a part of. And I think sometimes when we've had a lot of those conversations back and forth, there haven't been too many because we are pretty aligned with the types of brands we should be working with. But every once in a while, there are some that come through where some people feel really passionately about it, that we should do it, and others feel that we shouldn't. And to me, that if there's that disparity, that shows like sometimes your own personal preferences and your own personal things might be bleeding into it, which can be, when you're talking about something like you just said, that's emotion-led about this brand, affinity, it can be kind of hard to separate those. But I think to keep a clear mindset of like, this is just a brand that I would like to work with because I like them, me. I'm well into my 30s. I'm not like our prime target demographic. So sometimes I see like, I would love to work with this like kind of niche luxury brand. Ultimately, the amount of resources that we would put into it, it wouldn't harm our brand positioning, but it's not going to do anything that we need to do. And we would be better served focusing elsewhere that really speaks to our core consumer and what they want to do.
That's interesting. That's like almost like understanding that there's like goals and ambitions and passions that we have as individuals, but then there's goals and passions that we have as individuals in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think something that entrepreneurs need to start having a conversation about more frequently is a lot of us have our identity strapped in our work, our identity strapped in our business. So when you are putting something out there, you're literally trying to make it for someone who looks like you, smells like you, but that might not always be the case or be the thing that actually makes the business thrive. So that must be.
I mean, because I think there's something interesting you said as well, Steve, which is about actually there's a commercial aspect to this. So let's not forget that ultimately, if you're in business, you're in the business of being in business. So there should be at some level a lens which says, does this make commercial sense for us? So I mean, I've just got one question which I've just kind of thought of, but have you been in a position where a partnership hasn't been working out, and how have you sort of managed to kind of sort of wound that down? So my experience has been, I bought a partner into an account, and they effectively sort of got us out the account. And I, to this day, don't know quite how they did it, but it was a pretty bad time for me around that. And I sort of think back, could I have stopped them from doing it? Could I have shut them down sooner? So I was just wondering, because again, from your experience, have you had partnerships where you just go, well, actually, I wish or we've had to kind of close it, or I wish we'd closed it down?
Yeah, and I mean, those conversations are tough because we had one earlier this year, which is a brand that we all love on the Depop side and would love to work with again. I think we can still, but the way that it was structured, it was just there was a core misalignment between what we do as a company and what they wanted us to do. And so we spent a lot of time trying to kind of retrofit their idea into what we do, and ultimately it just wasn't working. And so we kind of, this is after a few months of working together, we had to just kind of go back and say, listen, we've gotten so far away from what we do as a company and what our app is for, and it's just, we're really trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, or whatever the saying is. That's just not working. Now, it was fortunate, again, this is something that's really useful to be a small team, because I was the only one who was working on it for that long. So it wasn't like we had poured a bunch of resources into this and that. Now, it was still frustrating for me to have spent a lot of time doing it, but we kind of mitigated any kind of loss in that way. And we hadn't gotten to the contracting phase or anything like that. We were trying to work out the terms of the deal, basically. But yeah, I mean, it was an uncomfortable conversation to have. I got a few very angry phone calls. I think the way to very angry phone calls that then like a week later turned into, okay, we get it, we understand, and let's work together in the future. So hopefully we'll be able to. But which is a best case scenario. I think one thing that I did that was helpful for me in this specific scenario was take it to the wider team internally and let them know, like, I'm seeing this problem. I just want to make sure that everyone here can back me up in case we need to. So it wasn't all falling on my shoulders, which was just from, I was still the one who had to have the conversation and everything, but it was still useful to know that you had some support behind you in case you needed to do that.
I think that's so critical is don't carry all of the stuff on your own shoulders, because it can be quite intense, some of it. So thank you. That's kind of really interesting. I mean, Bejay, have you had experience where you've had to...
Man, like, where do I begin? I suppose.
Have you had any good partnerships?
No. We've had some great ones. I think there's a balancing act, right, to running a business and to growing a business. You need partnerships. Partnership for me is a retained client. It's someone that comes back and back and back. And I've been in a few different kinds of businesses. I think examples of where it's gone wrong, there's a few factors. One has been team changes, because the notion and the whole chemistry that gets built when you do a deal is often based on people liking each other as much as the product being good as well. So when your lead contact at the other place, moves on up, or changes department, and you're with a new person, the new person may sometimes want to come in and like get their wins and bring their people in or bring their initiatives in. So I remember a particular case where we've done really good work with a company a couple of years in a row. We were really good friends with the founders of the business as well, but we were dealing with their marketing team. Head of marketing moved on to another opportunity, but we were in the middle of securing the third-year partnership deal, and it was going to be bigger, and there was all of these different elements in it that were different. And the new person that came in had a different change of heart, and we were put in with a lower marketing manager for a period of time, 4 weeks, and the CEO of the business, and then the new person was hired 2 months later. But in that time period, the momentum had gone, and ultimately we had wasted a lot of resources. And I think it's hard, it's a balancing act. You can't always like charge deposit for everything up front. You always want to get the deal right. But that for me was a great reminder that you don't always just want to have one deal you're working on. You want to have a few that you're working on if you are not the A side. The A side being if we're Apple or we're Depop or we're Etsy and we're the brand, we're kind of controlling who we're partnering with sometimes. But when you're the vendor, the supplier that's trying to get in and do different things, you just got to understand where you are on that journey. There's sometimes we are the A side when we're dealing with other suppliers, but in that situation we weren't. And we were lucky that it wasn't the pandemic. So, there was a lot of other things we were working on, but it was a good reminder for the team that even though you had worked with this brand for multiple years, and we did go back to work with that brand, it was another 12 months later, once that rapport was built with that individual again. It was just a good understanding that, people can sometimes have an impact on the continued work. It can be out of the control of, the actual work you've produced, So that's something that was interesting to float, and I'm hoping anyone entrepreneur that goes through that, just remember it's a relationship game. There's some people you'll meet and you do business with them, not now, but it will be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. But people remember how you made them feel. They're watching you more than you think, but they're also not watching you. They are cracking on with their lives, but just do always have in the back of your mind that the words you're using when you're talking about the work you're doing on LinkedIn, on Twitter, the case studies you're putting together, when someone does interact with you, they're generally going to check in on you over a period of time, as long as you don't fall out. So I think that's been something that's definitely helped my businesses and my contacts over the years.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And then something else that I introduced, which I thought actually would be a great way to kind of just keep everyone bonded together, regardless of where they go. I created a private newsletter. So I've got all of my executives who have literally brought from me for the last 10 years. I sent an email out about 2 years ago, said, hey, I'm going to send a newsletter. It's not for the public, it's just for me and my contacts. And it's a great way for me to let you guys know what's happening in the business quarterly. You're not my investors, but you've got your stakeholders. Let you guys know what's happening in the business, and also introduce you to innovations that we are seeing, that we're thinking about. And I found that that's been an interesting way to just spark conversations and coffees. And that little action has kind of meant that rather than me chasing someone being like, hey, when can we get coffee? When can we get coffee? We're finding a different way to add value to that relationship. And then you stay top of mind. So after this, Steve will be maybe added to my private newsletter.
There you go.
It's an interesting way to kind of, build that momentum and kind of be in someone's mind maybe 2 or 3 times a year, not every week, but that alone, with a viewpoint of actually these relationships are going to be here for multiple years. That is something that I recommend for all entrepreneurs to kind of implement.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think like you said, it is all about really relationships. And if people have a positive experience working with you, and then you remind them in a way like a newsletter, for example, that's really good. I think, when you're kind of under the wire, you're approaching deadline and stress can be high. I think the way that you kind of communicate is often what people remember in that regard. And then I think too, that's where it comes into, Bejay, what you were saying earlier about knowing what your brand values are. And Dave, what you said about honesty, like if you are in a situation where you don't want to continue a partnership at some point, if you've been upfront about all of that kind of stuff, you always have something to go back to as a reason why that people, they might try to argue to salvage something or to do something more than you really want to do. But if you have that clarity up front and you communicate that, you always have that to turn to as a justification for making decisions, which is a good reminder for partners and also, for yourself too. And I think also on a practical level, just like always write things down. So, if you have a call with someone afterwards, send them a recap, because not to be too, cynical or anything, but like you sometimes do need to refer back to what was discussed, what was agreed upon in a way that is concrete and is there, just to have it recorded. It's really helpful, I find.
I think that's, again, really good advice. I mean, I'm terrible at kind of keeping a track of things, and I've learned that to my cost over the years. And I think, as again, for entrepreneurs, there's some great tools out there which I think are worth sort of looking at. So Bejay introduced me to a service called Pipedrive, which is just a sort of basic CRM tool. But I love it because you can kind of basically jot down notes on phone calls and things like that, and it kind of keeps a track of it. So I think that's really good practical advice. So thank you.
Probably a segue now. We've obviously mentioned a few positive things there. We obviously had a bit at the start where we kind of went into a deeper framework there. But something that I've always found when building a brand partnership kind of strategy, building a sales strategy, just understanding where my business is going to go, is the fact that you sometimes have to deal with no's. I spoke about actually saying no to people and understanding the money, but sometimes also you put a lot of effort into a project and it's a no from that brand, and that partnership doesn't work and they're not going to contribute financially. I wanted to hear from both of you about how have you guys dealt with no's? What kind of resilience have you guys built? And how do you deal with imposter syndrome and confidence? Because, we all get different stages. I remember the first time I did £1,000 deal, a £5,000 deal, a 100K deal. Haven't quite done a multi-million-pound deal in one deal, but we've done it over time. But as you hit all these milestones, you kind of, there's that pinch me moments happen, right? But how do you deal with imposter syndrome, and talk to us about the confidence and resilience when you're kind of like trying to get something over the line and it just doesn't work on the other person's side?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough one. And I think I don't know what the answer is in terms of like eliminating imposter syndrome from your life. I think what's been useful for me is to talk to people and to understand that it's something that many people go through or deal with, no matter what the level is. I think that kind of human to human element has been really helpful to just understand that, like, yeah, you might feel this way. And it's fine. And a lot of people feel that way, and you have to just kind of go through it. I think you can't like shut it off completely, because that's the kind of thing that builds and builds. I do think, yeah, so allowing some space for it, but then saying, you know, just repeating to yourself, listen, I've done this, I've gotten this far, that's where I need to be. I am where I need to be. I've worked to get here, and just kind of repeating that as a mantra to yourself. Sometimes what I find is I just get kind of bored of saying that and I move on, because, you know what I mean? It's not like a big like, you know, profound thing, but it's just sort of like you only have so much space in your head for one thing at once. Yeah. I think in terms of that does kind of also feed into what I would say about the dealing with rejection is I do find it useful to remember that you're dealing with people. You know what I mean? Like everyone has gone through the same things that you're dealing with, and keeping that human touch, and just remembering that on the other side of an email, just because you can't see them reading it, is someone receiving it. And just like you are, they are doing that too. And, you know, we're getting into like a little bit corny territory of like, we don't know what anyone else is going through, but it's true. Like, we really don't. And people may be feeling pressures from sources that we don't even know exist. And that may color the way an email was blunt, or the way they don't respond to an email, or the way that they say no. And just kind of remembering that it feels personal. It's impossible to not make it feel personal in many ways, but ultimately it's personal for them too. And just kind of trying to come with meeting people where they are, I found is a good way to sort of, you can't eliminate the sort of sting of rejection, but it can dull it a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think, it's interesting you say about imposter syndrome, because I've learned over the years that if you don't suffer imposter syndrome, then you're probably not normal. So I'm very suspicious of people who are aggressively confident, to be honest with you. And I think I've learned that actually sort of doubting yourself it's a very normal process. Like Steve says, I mean, you know, you have to watch yourself so you don't kind of get caught in a cycle of self-doubt. But actually, I use my lack of confidence occasionally as energy, because I just go, well, you know, I can talk to myself around what's going on, and I can say, well, look, you know, based on the experience I've had, this just makes no sense. So I think it's really, for me, it becomes sort of a part of the internal dialogue I have. And again, in terms of things like emails, and, you know, I'm very old school. I came from a world where, you know, when I first started working, there wasn't email. I mean, in fact, I was in Yellow Pages, which is where I started my career. I was the first person with an email address in the entire building. And, you know, so I almost bring letter writing, old school letter writing, to emails. And I think about, you know, I mean, like I'm sure everybody, the number of emails which sort of sit in my draft folders whilst I'm sort of thinking about, you know, is it written right? Is the tone right? Particularly when you're looking at sort of business development and partnerships, you want to kind of make sure that you really do think this stuff through. And, you know, there's been 1 or 2 times in my career where I've let my emotions get in the way of stuff, and I've sent an email out, and it's one of my biggest regrets, that, you know, because once it's out there, you kind of can't take it back. So I think just really thinking about who things are going to is kind of really important.
Yeah, and I think also that's really hard. It's hard to sometimes hear criticism of yourself, in, you know, personally or professionally, but I think especially for people who are at the beginning of their journey, if you find a trusted mentor or a colleague, even, it doesn't even have to be someone who's senior to you, it can be someone at your level or even junior to you, allowing that moment of discomfort, but to ask them about how you're communicating is really useful, because you don't always know. You know, like I tend to be pretty wordy in emails, for example, and sometimes people are just like, think that I'm trying to pull a fast one on them or something. It feels salesy, when really it's just like, I'm a verbose person, you know what I mean? I've gotten better at it. But on the other side, though, sometimes when I get an email that's 3 letters, I'm like, this person is a monster. Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like, you have to kind of have that.
I'm still finding it when you get an email where they haven't said, hello, how are you? I still find that quite tricky, because I'm like, well, is it, but anyway, I'm learning through my children that that's just the way of the world, to be honest with you. So
yeah, but getting that feedback and like being a little uncomfortable, especially at first, if it's the first time doing it, it's like super uncomfortable to ask someone like, do I communicate efficiently and effectively? But like, especially because 9 times out of 10, the answer might be, if you're asking me this, then absolutely not. But like, I think the idea is just make yourself vulnerable, live through that discomfort, because it will serve you. It will serve you well. And there are things you're probably not aware of that you might be doing.
I think that's so good. Such good advice.
I love that. Yeah, just in my mind, I'm just thinking about all the types of emails I've received. I've also had emails where it's not even 3 words. It's everyone's looped in, like 10 people, and we're looking at like 5 or 6 paragraphs with receipts, like screenshots. And I've definitely sent some of those in my days as well.
Look, see, I've just got this book, which is called Letters of Note. And I think if you worry about kind of language and things around communication, that's a really good book. So it's sort of famous letters which famous people have written to each other, and it's just absolutely magical to kind of look at the tone that these sort of famous people use in terms of stuff. So anyway, that just sort of was that.
Love that. So a question that every entrepreneur likes to ask themselves is the how. But how do I practically do this? So I had a question loaded up, which was like, what's your best advice for someone looking to build a brand partnership team or looking to build a partnership team? Just like, often our people, our audience are people that have 1 to 4 people in their business, sometimes 10. So it's not something that people always know. I know, Steve, you mentioned a few times you're a 2-man team and you were a 1-man team for a while, but there was a bigger thing at play, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, what would advice be from both of you when it comes to someone looking to build their partnership or their brand partnership team for the very first time? What can they practically do in November or in December 2021 as they head into the new year?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of people that work with you on your team, I always look for people who have skill sets that are different than mine. And you won't really be able to know them until you actually work with someone, but you can look for someone whose experience is a little bit different. So I needed to hire for what my own needs were, someone who it was more senior. It wasn't an entry-level role that we were really looking for, but so they had to have some sort of practical like partnership experience. But I was looking for people who had a different type of experience than I did. So it wasn't just people who came through agencies and then went in-house, and ultimately that is what I found. So looking for complementary skill sets, I think is really useful. And I think also just sort of being open to looking outside of your own personal network. That's hard to do when you're an entrepreneur by yourself. But I think like it sort of becomes a feedback loop, or there's so much emphasis on networking and like building your network, and that's great, and you should definitely do that. But I think to build an effective team, you need to go outside of the people that you know personally. Easier said than done, but there are like I mean, organizations like this, for example, I'm sure can connect you with people that you wouldn't normally meet in your everyday life. But I just think otherwise your sort of inherent biases about who you hire, it's like an echo chamber if you're only working with people you know personally, and you've got to break out of that if you want to build a really effective team that can reach a lot of people and who can just bring a new perspective that you wouldn't have otherwise. I think it's a good thing to do, but it's also like a good business thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't actually add much more other than just being super clear in terms of what you're looking for. And I think, Steve, as you said, it's not employing carbon copies of yourself. It's thinking about people who add value to you and have a different perspective. But also people, it goes back to the whole value thing. What you want is people who share those kind of common values with you. So understand what the mission is. I think, if people don't understand that really at a kind of at a heart level, then that can be quite a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and I think too, like one thing that Depop has implemented that was really useful is just to start off before like before ever see a CV, I see like answers to questions that we put. And I think that's helpful because like in an interview, if we're being honest with you, people are, unless they're just really galaxy brain, you know, they're giving you answers that they know you want to hear. That's just the reality of it. But you can, and it's difficult, I think, in a one-on-one to have like a real connection in an interview setting. But you can at least get, I think, more of an insight if people are answering questions that you're just reading what they write on a piece of paper without knowing anything about them. You can get, I think, a little bit more insight into the kinds of things that you ultimately want from a partner, like the way they think, what they've chosen to highlight here that has no bearing on the beginning of the conversation you had with them, where you might share something about yourself that they can kind of latch onto because they want the job. You're kind of clearing a lot of that stuff out. So I found that to be pretty useful. And it's also brought in people who, like, if I were just, you know, trolling LinkedIn, I wouldn't necessarily have found otherwise.
Yeah, I love that. That has been really, really useful. I really enjoyed that, actually. It's got me inspired to go away and kind of think about what I'm going to do, brand partnerships here at TPP and all other stuff I'm involved in. It's been a really, really good time to have you here, Steve. Dave, is there any wrap-up question you want to have?
Well, I just had, I mean, if any small businesses out there think they've got a great idea which Depop might like, I mean, is there what's the best way to, I mean, I guess I'm using Depop as an example of a larger, but it could be any large. What's the best way to kind of approach a big brand? So it doesn't have to be Depop, but
yeah, it's tough because it's ultimately it is at the whim of the personal preferences of the person. I know that's not like a cop-out answer, but it's true. Like I you know, like LinkedIn has been really useful, but then when we were acquired, the LinkedIn, my inbox is just like you can't keep up with it. And it's because also like people just see partnerships, and so I'm getting any kind of brand that wants to do, like, you know, things, shipping solutions and transaction partners, you know what I mean? So it's hard to kind of go through. I would say, you know, I think contacting people in appropriate venues, so over email or over LinkedIn, is better than like necessarily like hitting them up on Instagram or something or whatever. But it's hard, you know, it's hard to say because other people might prefer that. I think you just have to kind of be respectful and not, you can follow up without pestering, you know what I mean? Like I don't think there's a silver bullet answer, unfortunately.
No, okay.
Yeah.
No, that's I mean, and you're right. I mean, what you don't want to do is become stalkerish and sort of odd around this whole thing. So yeah, no, that's. But I think, I mean, you know, thank you for your honesty around the kind of LinkedIn inbox, because, you know, again, I think what people perhaps don't realize is, I mean, you're there. Well, they do realize, but forget, is you're there, you're kind of globally available. You'll have a word in your name, which just means that sort of not just human beings, but bots and things like that will be looking to kind of, so yeah. No,
but I would still say if you're questioning, I mean, LinkedIn is like that's what it's for, is networking. So I think like you're probably, at least as a first go, I would say probably that is a good way to do it. And also, you know, people's email addresses are kind of easy to figure out most of the time.
Love that. And I suppose a question I had that will kind of add on to what Dave said, you know, before I used to send like things in post to people's offices sometimes to kind of build relationships, but you just don't know whether people are back in the office at the moment. Yeah. Could be quite a nice little thing to do, actually, a little challenge.
Yeah.
Are you back 1 or 2 days a week at all?
Yeah, about 2 days a week.
So
yeah.
So I think that's a nice little thing someone can do between now and Christmas, with maybe 10 or 15 brands that you really want to work with. Put something in there because it's like a surprise and delight moment. It's a bit more old school. And I think the other thing that I found, just to answer your question there, Dave, is probably like trying to find events that these people are speaking at. You know, like if someone's speaking somewhere, they'll generally share it on their social if it's an industry event. So try pop up in places people are at and provide value. Even if it's virtual, you can still provide value and make a connection. So for example, David Barra, I'll shout you out. You've been communicating with us a lot on the chat. You know, if you hit me up after today, your name is in my head because you've positively contributed to the session. So even if it's a virtual event, it's still a safe space to kind of get value and give value, in my opinion.
Yeah, I wish I had more practical advice to give on that front, but it's wild
Well,
wild
look,
west out there.
I mean, your point is there's no silver bullet, which means there's no wrong answer as long as it's not stalkerish. I think is so. You know, I mean, to Bejay's, some of my the best win I ever got was through a handwritten letter to someone very senior in a bank, and that kind of turned into a lot of work. And I think actually thinking outside the box about sort of making contact with people. So we wanted to get somebody on one of the TPP podcasts. So I sort of offered my services to this company to do some amateur oyster shucking for them for a video, because they're just it's an online fish shop, and they're just launched a range of fresh oysters. So just as a way of getting attention to them, I sort of sent them a video of me doing some oyster shucking, and they said this is brilliant and put it up on their social thing, and that got me noticed. So
Amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, once I've got my idea, I shall be in touch with you. My partnership ideas.
Perfect. I'm all ears.
I love it. Well, guys, it's been another great session. We have another session tonight all around building community. As always, please sign up to the Purposeful Project's website. We have our newsletter there. We have resources available for you guys. And we may be trying to do something in person pretty soon. So please do tune in. Thank you again to my esteemed guests this afternoon, both Steve and Dave. It's been very, very good. Cheerio, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bejay. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, both. Thanks so much.